So welcome everybody, my name is Peter Yusuf, Senior Market Analyst at IronFX. With me I have my colleague, Feroz Bandelides, also an analyst at IronFX. We are to be discussing the US elections today. It's a matter which has been tantalizing the markets. The two candidates, Trump and Harris, are neck and neck. Practically, the elections are currently too close to call. There's a wide uncertainty given that neither of the two candidates is having a lead over the other. At the same time, understandably, the stakes are high. It's practically the presidency of the strongest country worldwide. We expect the issue to be tantalizing the market, yet there are a number of scenarios which could play out. And that's one factor which more or less tends to make the possible results of the elections even more messy. While at the same time, we may see different market reactions depending on the market as such. Say, for example, we may see a different reaction in the FX market, a different reaction for US stock markets, crypto, or gold. Now, what are the key issues which are separating the two candidates?
So I think one of the issues is inflation, the economy, and then immigration. I think those are the three key factors that this election cycle has taken, and in particular, inflation and the economy. So one has been inflation, which has soared under the Biden administration, but has come down following the Fed's policies. One is the economy. We have seen issues within the US economy in terms of manufacturing and services. So there was a bit of a concern about the resiliency of the US economy. So it was showing from the beginning of the year, where the market expectations were roughly seven rate cuts by the Fed, because they were expecting the economy to weaken, which could in turn force the Fed to cut earlier. That changed, and we're now heading for perhaps maximum of 2 rate cuts by the end of the year. We've seen 1. So since the beginning of the year, we've seen a resilient US economy. Then we saw a 10% decline in the S&P 500, if I'm not mistaken, in July. Okay. And now we're back on track for a relatively, I'd say, okay US economy. But if we look at last week's NFP figure, there are some concerns still about the resiliency of the US economy. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. And that has been seen as well with inflation, which has been seeping into the, I'd say, pockets of the US consumer. So that is a bit of a concern. If I'm not mistaken, the majority of voters, when asked which was their main concern for this election cycle, was the economy.
Okay. But at the same time, we could mention a number of issues which may be off market but are still tantalizing voters. So, for example, abortion rights. That would be a soft issue which tends to be coming out pretty strong at the end of the pre-election period. We may also mention here gun control, where the two sides may have differing opinions on how to do that.
I think gun control is more of a general issue. I think gun control hasn't been a main factor of this election cycle. I think it's more about abortion. So Roe v. Wade, they're returning, and it's been a talking point for a lot of Democrats during the election cycle as well to garner the female vote in support of Kamala Harris. But I don't think I've seen that much about gun control regulation.
I saw a brief clip about polls in Iowa. Is it true that Iowa has turned blue?
Polls in Iowa have turned blue, and we're talking about the presidential race, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. We're using, for our viewers as a reference, we're using 538 today. So this is where we're getting our data. So 538, ABC's polls of polls. We're going to be predominantly using that for today. For Iowa, I have Ohio. I don't think I have Iowa.
Yeah, I think that it was one of the big surprises. It's not a swing state, but it used to be traditional Republican. Mm-hmm. And political analysts have stated that practically it has switched to blue.
For Iowa?
Yeah, and the main reason why, which was cited, was practically exactly these abortion rights, where women are coming out strong to vote, at least in Iowa, which was an issue. Anyway.
According to the polls, the last poll was on the 2nd of November. Yeah. Trump is in the lead by 4.3%, so 49.3, versus Kamala's 45%. So it does appear to be still red, according to the poll, which was last taken on the 2nd of November.
Okay.
But if we're talking about the recent one over the weekend, I think
You're talking about nationwide polls?
Yeah, I'm talking about the nationwide poll, but the one over the weekend, if I'm not mistaken, also, yeah, did turn towards Kamala, and we are seeing a bit of a market reaction.
Okay, how about... Actually, I'm seeing national polls providing Harris with a narrow lead of 1.1%, right?
That is correct, yes, last taken on the 4th of November.
Okay.
It's very close. I mean, even if we look at Pennsylvania, Trump is in the lead with a margin of victory by 0.1%, Nevada 0.6%. North Carolina, we did expect, I personally expected that Trump was going to be leading that particular state following the natural disaster and then the media coverage
Yeah.
over the response by FEMA. It makes a bit of sense that perhaps voters may have been dissatisfied with the government's reaction.
Yeah, that was a big issue.
Which in turn could lead the state to turn red. Wisconsin, 1% for Harris. It is very, very close.
Everything.
Yeah, it's
Practically, at the end of the day, you have only two states which tend to stand out. The one's Iowa, and it's in favor of Trump, 4.3% lead. And Kansas, which, okay, in my opinion, was understandably in favor of Trump anyway.
Kansas is a solid red state. Now, the issue might be Nevada. I mean, we have Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. Those are what I would classify currently as the swing states. So we have
And
5 states.
And they're practically tied.
They're practically in the tie. I think it might come down to Pennsylvania. Wisconsin and Michigan could be blue, same with Nevada. But if Arizona swings towards red, then we might see it being decided on Pennsylvania.
So practically at the end of the day, it could be decided, the whole election could be decided on a couple of thousand votes in each state.
And that is the question, and that is the issue that we have today. If it's decided by a couple of thousand votes, then what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yep. Okay, besides the uncertainty which becomes even more clear, let's line out the basic scenarios which could play out in these elections. The first would be, we have to first note that we have not only the presidential elections, we have also elections for the House of Representatives. All seats are up for grabs.
Yep.
And for the Senate, about a third of the seats is to be contested also today.
Yes.
So practically we have 4 possible scenarios. The first would be a red sweep, where we have, say for example, Trump winning the presidential elections. At the same time, the Republicans may control the Congress, the US Congress. At this point, mind you that to control the Congress, you have to control both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Second scenario would be Trump wins, but the Democrats control Congress. And the third scenario would be Harris wins, yet Republicans control Congress. And the fourth scenario is a blue sweep, where we have Harris winning the elections in the presidential elections, and at the same time the Democrats having control over Congress, both houses, and practically having a free hand.
It's a very hot debate. The polls
I
are
would be focusing, in my opinion, on 2 main scenarios. The first scenario would be the red sweep,
okay.
which practically provides Trump with a free hand. The second scenario would be what would happen if, say for example, Harris marginally wins the elections and the elections are contested by Trump. Of course, the contesting could come either way. Say Trump wins marginally and Harris contests. At that case, we may see practically uncertainty being expanded, and that could create mayhem in the markets.
I think with the race being too close to call, so it's a 50-50, it's a toss-up. I think it's going to be decided by a couple thousand votes, and that's the issue. I mean, in the event of a red sweep, that's an interesting scenario. The polls do have that in play. So for the House of Representatives, we are seeing that there are some ways for the Republicans to gain that majority, to retain that. For the Senate, it is expected by the polls that the Republicans may be getting a 51 member majority, so they could control both the House and the Senate. So that would be very interesting for the markets. We might see US equities gaining, but then I think we're going to dive into this a bit later in terms of the economic implications of a red sweep.
Okay, now for our viewers which are outside the US, we have to clarify here that the US elections are not decided by the majority of votes,
No.
but by the Electoral College. Each state votes a number of electorates, and practically the majority of the Electoral College is deciding the president as such.
Yes, not
So
the popular
it doesn't
vote.
matter if, say, for example, Trump or Harris gains the majority on a nationwide scale of the votes. The question is, which one of the two will be getting the majority of the Electoral College? That's one. Another issue which tends to pass a little bit under the radar, and I think has not been discussed as much as it should. If we go back to the 2016 elections, when Trump was elected for the first time, it was at the time against Hillary Clinton. Polling was showing Clinton being ahead, and Trump made the surprise, and that was explained by the idea that there are a high number of voters which tend to refrain from actually taking part in the polls. And those voters tend to be more leaning towards the Republican side because they're viewing mass media more or less as controlling the public, or they want less government control, so they don't participate. So there is a hidden vote which is not depicted, may not depicted in the polls as such. That could provide a lead for Trump, in my opinion. That's one. The second issue, though, is how are these voters dispersed state-wise? If they are also in swing states, because if they are, say, for example, in California, which is blue, doesn't matter. But if they occur most in Pennsylvania, that's a different story. Now, another issue which would be interesting is a hidden vote by which practically Kamala Harris could draw an advantage. There are a number of issues, social issues, which tend to favor Harris. And it's going to be coming up to the turn-up.
So we're talking about Roe v. Wade, so the abortion rights.
Yeah. And it's a big question how high the turn-up will be of the elections. If we have a high turn-up, and that seems to be the case for these elections, then we may see practically any advantages being eliminated and practically we're starting over. Because the differences are so narrow, should we see voters turning up at the rate of 70+%, it may differ from the poll substantially. So we may see surprise results.
One of the hidden issues that we are talking about also could be the US's foreign policy, the one in particular with Israel and Palestine.
I would say that that's what concerns the rest of the world. A number of European states have been losing their sleep over it. And it's not only Israel, it's also Ukraine.
Ukraine, that's particular in the event of a Trump win. But I think based on the electorate, I think Democrats are more concerned, so in particular for the voter turnout. The Biden admin has been towing a very careful line between supporting Israel and criticizing Israel. A, because of the Jewish lobby that exists in the US, which is very, very powerful. One is that as well. And I think a lot of Democrat voters may be dissuaded from voting for Harris by looking at what the US has done and has not done in that particular conflict. I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction between the Democratic voter base in regards to Harris's approach towards the particular conflict in the Middle East. I think that is more tantalizing for those voters rather than Ukraine and Russia. Because Ukraine and Russia has been going on for quite a while now. The issue for the Trump presidency is more about Europe. I don't think Americans are that significantly concerned about Ukraine and Russia currently, as the airwaves have been dominated by the Israeli-Palestine conflict.
Sure.
So it's sort of gone to the back of their minds, and it's not that talked about lately. It's something. It's just another Tuesday. It's a bit more casual in conversation. Now there is also an issue with the voter base about immigration. I think that is also a hidden issue that we haven't really talked about.
One small break here
Hmm?
before we move to immigration, which is key, definitely. I'm noting the paradox here about the Israel. I agree with you that the Israeli issue is conflict is taking precedence over Ukraine. That's one. Let's set this aside. But there is a paradox here. The paradox is, I think you have touched it briefly. It's on the one hand, Trump has the pro-Israeli vote,
Yes.
the pro-Jewish vote. There's a clear advantage there. Paradoxically, also Arabs, or a large number of Arabs, have been, complaining about this, I wouldn't say neutral, but pro-Israeli stance of Biden. And that stance may have driven a number of Arab voters or towards Trump as well.
Or perhaps driving them not to vote at all.
Or another option, yeah. Which is also favoring Trump anyway.
Less voters for the Democrats, more chances for them to pick up the
Yeah.
votes.
So practically in foreign policy, the main issue which may be discussed among US voters would be Israel. Now let's have a look at immigration.
So for immigration, under Trump's administration, we had Title 42, which was used to essentially, I would say, deport immigrants at some point. But effectively, looking at the big picture, Trump was against that immigration, so illegal immigration from the US's southern border from Mexico. And then when the Biden admin came in, they removed some of those restrictions, but did keep Title 42 as well. But there has been an issue with illegal immigration in the US. It is something that is problematic amongst the voter base. We're seeing propaganda and media outlets circulating different news. One is the sanctuary city states, which Trump has vowed to abolish. Then there's also the talks that migrants were being bused from Texas to New York, and then from New York back to Texas. So this is an issue. Whether we like it or not, we do have to address the illegal immigration that exists in the US, which is why, of course, it's taken such a role in the debates, in the conversations, the airwaves, etc. The Biden administration was very, very lenient with immigration. They may have kept some of those restrictions put by Trump, but they were more lenient, at least in their messaging. They were more, I'd say, welcoming. Now, the issue is that as we came up to the elections and the election cycle began, the Biden administration realized that this was an issue. And then Biden appointed Kamala to take care of the immigration problem at the southern border, which also led to Trump and the Republican Party calling her, quote, the border czar.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an issue. And we're seeing a shift in the tone from the Democrats, which is a bit more anti-illegal immigration. They both want to address it. But then you have the union of the Border Patrol agents, which came out in support of Trump, so the majority of them. So it is an issue within the US. So I think most voters trust Trump on immigration rather than the Biden/Harris administration.
Another paradox. Say, for example, I agree that the messaging here is that Trump is going to be harder on immigration than Harris. That's one. But at the same time, we have to note that the Biden administration drove out more illegal immigrants than the Trump administration, which tended to pass also under the radar. I think the big question on immigration is the Latino vote. And at this point, it's interesting to note that how Latinos are being split, Latino votes are being split between two issues. The first would be the economy.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see Latino voters which are more concerned about the economy maybe preferring Trump. On the other hand, we have to note that one mistake which the Trump campaign had was it downplayed and at some point was quite rude against Latino voters. And I'm not talking only about Mexicans here. It's all over the place.
We're talking about the stand-up comedian at his rally who made those comments.
It's not only the comments of the stand-up comedian, Trump himself also during his presidency, but also during the campaign. I wouldn't say slurred Latino immigrants, but definitely had a very, very low esteem on them. Anyway, a number of Latino members of the Latino community could exactly be worried about the intentions of Trump to actually drive immigrants out. And it's another question whether he will be also touching on Latino immigrants which already have a green card. It's something which was not discussed so widely, but it's a possibility. And I think that could be swaying at least a big part of the Latino community towards sides. But the split is there. And it's interesting also how the Latinos are reacting within the community in the following sense that Latino immigrants which have already the green card or have already a US passport, second, third generation may be somewhat indifferent to newcomers.
True. They've been in the US. Their status is not undefined. They're American citizens.
And another question I'm setting here is how the Latino issue or the immigration issue, to be more general here, is being viewed upon by different states. It's one thing to be in the South, the sunny states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, etc. And I think there is a different viewing of the issue in northern states. So for example, Washington State, or New York, or Northeast Coast in general. So that's, I think, one point of friction which could be tantalizing voters in that sense. And we have also to note here that the issue was taken to the extremes.
Taken to the extremes?
Yeah.
In what way?
It's one issue which Trump used not only in these elections, but in the past elections as well, in the 2016 elections and the 2020. And the US community may be more polarized to either direction. There's very little, if any, common ground on the issue.
I mean, we've seen it happen before, and we're seeing it now. It's being used a lot as a propaganda tool, especially with the Mexico border. And I remember one of the videos I saw was the allegations made by the Republican Party that the Democrats were letting them in. They were fighting with the Border Patrol agents, and then there was this very viral video which was barbed wire being placed up that allowed illegal immigrants to move in. This issue has been very polarizing, and I think you are very correct in saying that it does depend between the northern and the southern states. Surprisingly, though, New Mexico is expected to be blue, so to vote for the Democrats, but Arizona is red.
As is Florida.
As is Florida. California is blue, of course. It's a Democratic stronghold. I mean, these issues, I think, are meant to divide the American people. I think they're being used in such a way to weaponize particular issues. So the comments made by Trump are not by chance. So the borders are. That is a slogan that has been thrown around constantly. It's like a constant reminder. The issue with Harris is that she hasn't distanced herself that much from Biden. So if Americans are hearing, even on CNN, for example, that there's an issue with immigration, then if they look to who was placed in charge of this issue, that's Kamala.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. When you see and you believe personally that there's an issue with immigration, and then you see who was responsible for addressing that problem, that's Harris. And she hasn't distanced herself enough from the current administration So that's a bit of an issue. I think she's losing votes from that
Could be.
point of view. And then we also have for the Latino vote in particular, there was this, there's another slogan that was being touted by the Trump campaign, which was, I think it was Comrade Kamala, if I'm not mistaken. So that could also appeal to Latino voters, and in particular those that have fled Cuba. So if you're...
Actually, Cubans which have fled the country are clear-cut Republicans. No questions asked. Florida is red, one region is red. And actually, I think Cubans, refugees, which are living now currently in Florida, are hoping that the Trump administration will be imposing stronger measures against Cuba. Anyway, let's have a look at a different topic, and that would be energy environment. That's another issue, and we are slowly entering the economy by this one. Okay, on the one hand, we have... Can we actually say that we have a more eco-friendly Kamala Harris or not?
Are we talking about actions or just words?
The rhetoric is one part, the actions are to come.
I mean, in terms of rhetoric, the Harris administration, so their, I'd say, brochure has said that they're going to be investing in renewable energy, energy sources by cutting red tape. So I'm guessing that could be solar, wind, and the usual stuff that's been touted by the Democrats. But the reality is that oil production has soared on public lands under Biden. According to the EIA, so the Energy Information Administration of the US, by roughly 530,000 barrels a day since 2020. Quote, the country is currently producing more oil every year than any country in history.
Okay.
So how environmentally friendly have been the Biden administration's policies, and will these continue? So with the way we're seeing it from the Republicans and the Democrats is that energy prices are too high, and they both want to bring them down, because that could allow trickle-down economics, so paying less for energy could increase consumer spending, could improve the standard of living perhaps, could ease the financial burden on lower to middle class families. If you're paying less for energy, then perhaps you could consume more. You might have something saved up in case of an emergency, but both want to address the energy issue. On the one hand, we have Harris, which is more renewable, so playing into that environmentally friendly, democratic left vote. On the other hand, we have Trump, who is, quote, drill, baby, drill.
Oh, yeah.
So more oil, yeah, it's more classic. So drilling and drilling and drilling, which could also reduce energy by reducing their energy independence and increasing production. Now, there are a wide variety of issues with both of these sides. Now, one is also goes into foreign policy, but we can stick to energy currently, let's say. I think Kamala's rhetoric is investing in renewable energy. That would be nice. Ideally, how much will get done is debatable. So we're seeing about the wind turbines, for example, in Germany with Siemens Energy. If you remember, there was an issue with the wind turbines. There was, I think, one bolt that was causing damage to the entire wind turbine. So they are environmentally friendly, but to the extent at which they can substitute oil, it's very debatable.
Yeah.
Now, if we're talking about nuclear energy, that is something that I have seen personally taking traction in the US. Mm-hmm. That is a different story. That might actually be the most ideal renewable energy source that could facilitate the US's demands. Now, excluding the influence and power that the US gets by buying oil from Saudi Arabia.
It's another paradox how the nuclear energy is considered to be an alternative to green, but at the same time it's still fossil.
Correct.
Uranium has to be mined. Anyway, let's move to economic policies. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I would like to have a look at the intentions of the two candidates on economy, but even the economy, I think, is being broken down to smaller issues. Say, for example, Trump may be following a more isolationist economic policy than Harris, in the sense that he intends to be slapping tariffs all around. more tariffs on, I don't know, Mexico, more tariffs on China, more tariffs on anyone. At the end of the day, okay, Trump is saying that those countries are going to be paying for the tariffs, but that's not the case. The consumer is paying for the tariffs. And that's something which has been neatly taken out. That's one issue. I would be also noting here that we may see a wider deregulation in the markets under Trump, while on the contrary, Kamala Harris may try to tighten the grip on the market. That's the second issue. And it's going to be interesting also to see how the economy is going to be benefiting for small and medium-sized businesses over large, big companies in the US, and whether there is a difference in the two candidates between the two.
I think both candidates are trying to address that middle class issue. So I think Harris, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be introducing some tax credits or certain economic policies that are designed for small to middle class families, individuals, etc. Now, I'm going to start with Trump. So Trump wants essentially a 60% import tariff on goods and a 10% levy on other imports. He also wants to put levies on Mexico. Now, the Trump administration had introduced these tariffs on Mexico, but the way they were going around these tariffs was exporting to Mexico and then finalizing the product, so, quote, changing the product, which would then grant it that made in Mexico label, and essentially evading those tariffs.
Okay.
As you correctly said, the issue is that the consumers will be paying. Trump has this way of saying that he loves, he said his favorite word is tariffs.
Yeah.
The problem is, China's not going to be paying the tariffs.
No.
The US consumer is going to be paying
Yeah.
the tariffs. Now, in that sense, he might be trying to strengthen the domestic US economy, but to what extent? Like, the consumers are going to be paying more. By the time the US economy picks up and then investment goes in and they're able to mitigate that potential gap, it's going to be an issue for a lot of...
I think the tariff logic of Trump is problematic on multiple issues. First of all, we have mentioned it already, is that the tariffs are being paid by the consumer, not by the exporting country. That's one. So even if you slap tariffs on products imported from China, still that would be leading to high inflation. That's one, in the US. Second issue, which complicates the matter, in my opinion, is the fact that many products which are being imported from China are actually made by US-based companies in China, which have set factories up there. Now, at this point, Trump wants to practically bring back factories back in the US. However, the question which arises here is whether the US will be able to accommodate these factories with low costs or not. And I don't think they will be. It may be a more, I wouldn't say lucrative, but a more attractive alternative to China could be, say, for example, Vietnam
Or India.
or Indonesia.
We're seeing...
So practically, and that, what's going to happen then? Are we going to be, is the US going to be slapping tariffs also in India, also in Indonesia, also in Vietnam? Where does this end?
That's a very good question.
And
then we have Europe as well.
yeah, the Europeans are a very big story as well, with their car industry, and they will be suffering as well, and they are not going to be taking it nicely. No way.
So
Especially the French.
So Trump wants to go to war with China and then the EU. Now, for China, there is also, we could address this a bit later on, there is a geopolitical maneuver for putting tariffs on China. There is a military towards national security aspect. But for Europe, that's a bit more of an issue in terms of the relations, and especially now with an attempt for a new world order by the BRICS, isolating your allies.
Let's touch it now.
Okay.
Let's touch it now. Say, for example, we recognize we have a bipartisan support in the US which favors slamming tariffs on China.
Okay.
There is a geopolitical competition between China and the US right now.
Yes.
So I think at the end of the day, the competition with China is going to be growing anyway.
China is an upcoming power, so competition is increasing. The issue is you have the microchips that are being manufactured in China. That is one. Then you also have the risks of Taiwan,
Yeah,
the one China
that's
policy.
everything.
So history has taught us that when there is a rising challenger to the world's superpower, usually the world has gone to war. Now, if I was the US and I was seeing China rising, so their economy, they're expanding their navy, they're increasing their defense capabilities, they're encroaching on the sovereignty of Taiwan, which is part of the US's first island chain, which is meant to keep China in.
Okay, diplomatically speaking, the Chinese are having the advantage in the sense that the UN has already acknowledged that Taiwan is part of China. But there is a window here of the next 4 years. And there's a high probability, I wouldn't say high, but a rising probability, that the Chinese are going to make a move on Taiwan in the next 4 years. So it's going to be crucial who will be leading at that moment the US. Will it be Trump or will it be Harris?
And then we'll see the different response.
Yeah, and there's also a qualitative issue here. In the following sense, Trump as president from 2016 to 2020 used to take extreme options and rather unpredictable options. And imagine that was the first term. Now he's coming, should he get elected for a second term, most probably Trump will be far more conscious, one, and more determined. And we may see him taking even more unpredictable and more extreme decisions.
We might.
That's one worry which tends also to be somewhat lurking under the radar.
Yeah, and the way how Trump is going to handle foreign policy,
Yeah,
especially with the comments he's made.
yeah. Anyway, back to economy. There's another question here, which is actually in the heart of the economy. How far will Trump, should he get elected, how far will Trump be involved with the Fed? Because Powell's term is ending.
Trump has said that he wants the president to be more involved in the Fed's decision, and clearly he's not a fan of Powell.
Yeah.
So the question is now, what's going to happen? What's he going to put? Is he going to be more involved? Then what I find very interesting is the Fed's independency will be brought into question.
Compromised.
Yes. So then, will we have a US president that is directly influencing the Fed and their decisions? Then how will the market react? If you're taking control and you're removing that independence from them, you could easily, much more easily, influence the US markets. In my view, the removal or the placing of an individual that is very close to Trump, let's say in the Fed, would be very bad for stock markets. There are certain checks and balances, which is why there is also the possibility that equities might gain if, let's say, Trump is elected with a Republican Senate but a democratically controlled House of Representatives, whereas rather than a red sweep or a blue sweep, vice versa as well.
Yeah.
The checks and balances in the US economy are there for a reason. US economy, essentially for the US, for the government. Checks and balances provide some comfort that not one party will be able to do whatever they want and however they want. There will be a compromise. Now, moving back to the Fed, if there is not an independent process for the Fed, then suddenly it's much more volatile, there's more concern, and I wouldn't be surprised to see stock markets being extremely volatile, and until the next elections, we might not be having that expected growth, I'd say.
Definitely.
It's a matter of...
But I'm going to be taking a more direct view here. I expect that should Trump get elected, he will be questioning the Fed's decisions directly. We may see him highlighting the need for more rate cuts. And I would expect at some point, at least when Powell's term ends, if not earlier, to replace Powell possibly with a dove. Because dovish monetary policy tends to favor fiscal policy. And I think that's going to be something which Trump will be actively seeking. On second note, there's another big question which comes in mind here. Should that be also accompanied by deregulation of the markets? Then I would be saying that on macroeconomic level, the basis for a new crash are being set. It's something which we saw happening after the dot-com crash practically.
We also saw it last year.
Yeah.
The deregulation from Trump on the banks is what led to
Yeah.
Silicon Valley Bank and then First Republic to collapse, which sparked concerns about 2008 again.
So the stakes for the economy are high. And I'm not talking about the economy of the next 4 years. We may see any effects being expanded over a longer term period. I would be also noting here a second issue. What about corporate tax rate?
More favorable for companies under Trump rather than Harris.
Yeah.
Harris...
We may see more or less another tax cut for corporations. That could provide practically some support in the following sense that the last tax cut which was provided, practically Trump lowered corporate tax at an official level of around 17%.
Wasn't that kept by the Biden administration in part as well?
Yeah, it was kept. But it was interesting to note how this was used. This was done under the idea that the contraction of the corporate tax rate would allow for companies to have more cash, and that cash would be trickled down to the economy as such. At the end of the day, though, what happened was that the extra proceeds for the companies were used for buyback schemes of shares. And that was one of the main reasons why shares were driven higher at that period. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happening as well. But that leads us also to the next issue.
Before we move on to the next issue, there is something we haven't discussed about the economy.
Which one?
The budget deficit.
Oh, yeah.
The budget deficit of the US.
Yes, but okay, as a general view here, the budget deficit is expected to rise.
Yes. Under both administrations, regardless of who wins.
And it's already at very high levels.
Yeah.
And the Chinese have the atomic bomb hold.
Waiting to use it.
In US bonds. Anyway, the big question here is, do you think that under Harris or under Trump, will there be the wider blowout of the budget deficit and the national debt?
From what I've listened and from what I've read, Harris is claiming that her budget is better than Trump's. That is going to reduce it more, it's going to be less, it's going to add less to the government's budget. Trump, of course, on the other hand, is counter-arguing it, saying that he has his own economists. So it's a 50-50 view. But the Trump policies of the tariffs and then the trade wars, in theory, and purely theory, if we have the corporations moving back to the US, investing more, then spending more, maybe the revenue gaining from the tax and from all these policies could reduce the budget in the long run, perhaps, but it's a bit of a far stretch. But from the two, It's very difficult to say, but I think perhaps under the Trump administration, it depends on the military spending. If Trump goes all in for the military and starts spending and spending and spending, then I think Trump's policies would be worse for the U.S. economy. If, however, Trump refrains from excessively spending on the military, maybe his might be better. But I think it depends on the military. The military budget is incredible for the U.S. It depends on that, purely.
I see a wider degree of uncertainty on this issue. I'm not going into the specifics. I would be highlighting the character of the two candidates. I think that Harris may be more susceptible to a restrainment of fiscal policy if needed. On the flip side, it's going to be very difficult for Trump to be restrained. If he wants to spend,
He's going to spend.
he will spend. And that's my main. I'm not talking only about military spending here.
I'm talking in general, like everything.
Yeah, it could be infrastructure, it could be a number of things.
Which is why we want a divided house.
Yeah, that's
Checks and balances.
Exactly, checks and balances.
So, from an economic perspective, so since we're going to be moving on to the next topic, what's your opinion? So we said 4 scenarios for the elections, and let's keep it for the economy. What about the S&P 500? Trump victory and a Harris victory. What's your thought? Long-term and short-term impact.
I think that should Harris be voted as president and she does not control the Senate, Congress in general, practically we're talking about a hung government, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Republicans practically shaking the specter of national debt rising, etc., which would be slowing down investment. On the other hand, if Trump wins and we have the same scenario reverse, say for example, the Democrats are controlling the House of Representatives, once again, split government, hang government, we may see some concessions being made in the following sense. The Democrats will be voting in favor of some of Trump's investments, yet at the same time maybe requesting also as payback another set of investments.
So a quid pro quo.
Yeah, quid pro quo.
So short term for the S&P 500 and then long term.
For the S&P 500, no, we're moving to the markets now. That would be also another big question. How will I would be noting 5 markets here.
Okay.
US stock markets, FX market, gold, it's another big issue, oil markets, and I would be also noting crypto.
Okay.
So we have 5 markets in play. Starting with US stock markets, overall a possible Trump win, a clear-cut Trump win, I think could provide support for US stock markets in the anticipation of Trump providing exactly this deregulation, which could allow for more business opportunities in the economy. At the same time, it could also get a boost given given the expectations for Trump to lower corporate rate tax even further, which would be boosting EPS, earnings per share. And yeah, why not? We may see also this idea of increased spending, and I would also add pressure for a more dovish monetary policy by the Fed, also providing more confidence for US stock markets and providing them with another boost. So practically a Trump win would be translating possibly, there's nothing certain here, in a green move for US stock markets.
In the short term. Or both. Because
it depends, because if you have a kick-in by an even lower corporate tax rate, then you may see further more buyback schemes, which would be leading to further rise of share prices, i.e. stock markets being in the greens for the longer term. And we have to note here that we are talking about 4 years,
Yes.
just to
To clarify, yeah.
yeah.
The issue, I think, is that some of Trump's policies could lead to an increase in inflation over the long run. That's why I was asking short-term or long-term. If Trump is given both control of the House and the Senate, and then his policies lead to increased inflationary pressures, and then he's in control of the Fed, suddenly, with the risks increasing and the stage being set for another recession, possibly a recession, stock markets might not benefit that much in the long run if he is unchecked. That's why I've been asking short-term, long-term. I agree with you that the Trump policies and overall a Republican majority would be beneficial for the stock markets. They're pro-business, lower tax rates, earnings per share, revenue might increase. It's ideal compared to the Democrats, because I think that the Democratic win could lead to a drop in the particular markets, so crypto.
Equities.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's stick to equities before. Let's move to the FX market
Okay.
before we have anything else. There was a big Trump trade which was in play over the past couple of weeks, at least couple of weeks. And it was interesting how the market was expecting that the US dollar may gain should Trump win. And this logic was based mostly on the idea that should Trump win, then the isolationist economic policy we had mentioned earlier would come into play, and exactly that could provide support for the USD. At the same time, such a scenario would also be implying that emerging markets may be lower. It could weigh on emerging markets and their currencies. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it weighing on the euro as well.
In the event of a Trump victory.
Yeah.
We also have the Fed on Thursday.
Yeah, before we go to the Fed, then we have a special appearance about the Fed as well. But let's isolate the elections as a result per se, and how that could affect the FX market in your opinion.
I think in the event of Harris' victory, the euro could gain against the dollar. Harris is more pro-alliance, so not a trade war with Europe. That also could weigh on the US dollar, not because that she's pro-alliance, but she's a Democrat. I tend to believe that when a Republican wins, the dollar may strengthen due to the isolationist policy, whereas Harris, which is more pro-trade, a bit more open when compared to Trump, could weigh on the dollar, could allow other pairs to gain. So the move of the dollar could also depend to the composition overall of the government. Okay. Is it the House? Is it the Senate? How close is the Senate? How close is the House? Are you able to turn one or two Republicans each vote to vote in favor for a Democrat and vice versa? For the Senate, is it 51? Is it just a vote which you can turn? Is it too much? Is it going to be difficult? Do you need a filibuster to get stuff done? There are so many different scenarios. It's quite difficult to pinpoint exactly what's going to happen. But from a general perspective, Harris victory, bad for the dollar, good for the euro, cable, USD/JPY. Whereas Trump victory could hit the euro, could hit the JPY, and could also hit the pound. So stronger greenback overall. That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah, it could weigh also on exotic currencies.
That is true. But I'm just focusing on the majors, which are the most, our concern. I mean, of course, others might be interested in the exotics, but from a general perspective, euro, cable, USD/JPY, and the loonie as well, those might see significant volatility. Now, what I find interesting is that in the FX market, it's going to be open. They're all open.
Yeah.
So we're getting the results. So local time GMT +2, we're getting them, I think, roughly 11 11 tonight.
Yeah, the very preliminary results.
Yes.
We may see some sudden moves here.
We're going to be seeing, I think we're going to see a lot of fluctuation. I think based on state by state, when it gets called, it's going to be very high volatility. And not only because of that, but we've also seen that traders' desks and all analysts are all hands on deck.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it's JP Morgan, Citi, and everyone, I'm assuming Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Everyone is on deck. So the thing was, the Americans take control today, the American session. The Asian session helps the American session. The American session helps the early Asian session. And then the Europeans help the late Asian session.
Yeah.
So there's 24/7 coverage from everybody.
I would be highlighting something which is also a little bit off topic, but it's relative. Remember the latest earnings reports of big banks for Q3, which were, if I'm correct, 3 weeks ago.
The traders desks that were making
Yeah.
a lot of money. So
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see exactly traders being, as you said, all hands on deck. Okay, let's have another question here. Gold market. What could raise gold's price? What could sink it?
Oh, gold is nice. Gold is very interesting. We've seen that it decoupled slightly from the dollar, but it picked up last week.
Yeah.
But overall, it's taking its own direction. Gold now is about geopolitics. Trump victory, clearly. Ukraine, Russia. Ukraine is going to be getting the short end of that stick. But if that comes to an end, gold will move nowhere. But on the other hand, you have Israel, which Trump is very much for. So that could continue. That's geopolitical chess. But overall, I think if we see Ukraine, Russia coming to an end, could weigh on the gold markets. Up until, of course, the Middle East picks up and then we see other geopolitical tensions across the world. But instantly, I'm talking once it gets called, gold might move lower. Trump, like him or not, his, I'd say, a bit of an irrational approach in our view. So the way we're seeing it, perhaps there is some rational behind it, but his flamboyance and then his personality makes him very scary to deal with. And I'm talking about Russia, China, even North Korea as well. He looks unhinged. So if they're more concerned about him, then they might be a bit more contained. If they're afraid that this individual could one day press that button and wipe him off the face of the earth just because his button is bigger than Kim Jong-un's, then gold could move lower.
Yeah, I'm taking a different approach here. I'm looking at the very short term,
Okay?
and I'm talking about the next week.
Okay.
That short term. And I think that I am focusing on a different aspect of the elections, and that's not who will be getting elected or not, but whether the elections, the presidential elections, will be clear-cut or not. If we see that we have a clear-cut result, maybe even in the next 2 days,
Okay.
where you have either Trump or Harris having a clear lead, that would allow practically for some past safe haven inflows of the precious metal to start unwinding and those positions closing. And that could weigh on gold's price somewhat, because you will have some certainty about the election.
But if we see results being contested,
Yeah, then you have practically uncertainty being extended, if not peaked. And that could lead also to, I wouldn't say riots, but definitely we may see some tensions within the US, which could lead to further safe haven inflows for the precious metal. And in such a scenario, we may see the precious metals price reaching new record highs.
I think on the eve of the election, gold is going to be very interesting. So if we're taking it very, very short term, I would agree. If the elections, whether or not the Republican or the Democrat wins, gold might see safe haven inflows if the result is contested. And the way the polls are showing how close this race is going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if gold races towards new all-time highs, if we see a very narrow win for either party. So
Okay,
short term,
I would be elaborating a little bit here. On the one hand, yes, I agree, the polls are showing that it's going to be very heavily contested election. One. Once again, I'm highlighting the possibility of a hidden vote, which could favor Trump and provide him with a clear win. That's one. The second possibility, which I would be highlighting for a clear win of either candidates, would be the increased turn-up of voters, which could, if it weighs on the one side or the other, could provide a clear result. But yeah, the main scenario which is being played out right now is that it's going to be heavily contested.
All right, so let's bring this slowly to a close. Tonight is going to be very interesting. I think we both agree from an FX point of view, a Trump victory would be better for the dollar.
Yeah.
Which means Euro USD might move lower, USD JPY could move higher, etc., so
Yeah.
forth. From economic perspective, I think both sides have ambitious plans. One, each has its own respective risks, but US stock markets might favor a Republican victory, at least in the short run. So we might see a boost for the S&P, Nasdaq, and Dow.
Yeah, overall, I think those three markets have been covered. We still haven't covered the oil market, though.
So what about the oil market? For Trump...
If Trump gets a clear win, okay, a red sweep, could we discuss about the possibility of oil prices falling?
Yes. Deregulation of a Republican government, funding, drilling, allowing more public land to be explored, increasing oil production, and clearly showing it. Whereas, despite the Biden admin, as we said earlier on today during our discussion, having risen, they've kept it under the wraps because it's not appealing to their voter base. From Trump's perspective, yes. The way I see it, Trump with a Republican government, oil prices could move lower.
Okay, let's have another. That's the inland aspect for the oil market and oil industry getting a free hand, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I accept it and I agree that it will be providing some pressures, downward pressures for oil prices in the expectation of higher productivity regarding oil. There's another aspect. Should Trump get elected, given that Trump under his presidency, practically the Abraham Accords were almost reached, could we be saying that it could provide some stability in the Middle East in the long term or not, which could also weigh on oil prices? However, that's a little bit far-fetched maybe.
Far-fetched depends on how you see it. The Abraham Accords were very close to being signed. There is an issue. They're currently tit for tat, so they're firing missiles at each other. Iran is trying to strike Israel. Israel is attacking Lebanon, so in particular fighting Hezbollah. They're also still fighting Hamas. They've eliminated, I think, every week now the new head of Hezbollah, so they're just clearing house. But with the Trump presidency, perhaps there might be some stability in the long run for the Middle East. But of course, there are certain groups that will not benefit. I don't think the Palestinians will be benefiting from a Trump, neither with Hezbollah. But if we talk about from alliances from that perspective, perhaps. But it's too volatile.
There was, at the Trump rally, Donald Trump at some point stated that he gave Netanyahu a time frame up until his inauguration, which should be at the beginning of January, should he get
To
elected.
finish.
Yeah, to finish it off.
If that's true.
And that would practically imply or could be translated to intense tensions in the area, which could push oil prices higher.
True. Because Israel is going to want to get it over with.
Yeah.
Iran is going to have to respond. Saudi doesn't want to get involved because they want to be close to the US, and they were close to signing that
Yeah.
the recognition of Israel. or Israel could embark on a massive bombing campaign bigger
Yeah.
than we've seen before just to get it over with. I could wipe.
Palestinians are on the losing side in this case.
I think win or lose, Democrats or Republicans, the Palestinians will be on the losing side.
We'll be suffering.
Even the Democrats, because Democrats haven't been able to control Netanyahu. Maybe Trump might, but even then, he's going to give him some time.
Okay, let's have a look at the crypto market.
Mhm.
Last but not least, huh?
Crypto.
Bitcoin has been rising. It didn't reach new record highs, but it reached at some point 73,800, if I'm correct, or near that level. And since then corrected lower and stabilized. Now the big question is, what would happen should Trump get elected in the crypto market? What could happen should Harris get elected in the crypto market?
Trump is very pro Bitcoin. Trump and Kamala have both been touting the crypto voters. They both want that vote. And you can see that from Trump by paying in Bitcoin for a burger in New York. And you can see that from Kamala, who has been supporting and has said she would support innovation in the digital assets market. So both want that vote. But the Republicans are much more crypto friendly. Less regulation, that's more favorable towards crypto. So Bitcoin. Trump wins, Bitcoin will move higher. Might move higher, because nothing is certain. But the way I'm seeing it, because Trump is much more pro-crypto, and so is the majority of the Republican Party, Republican victory overall, good for Bitcoin. Democrat victory, not good for crypto. And that is also perhaps for Elizabeth Warren, who has been very, very anti-crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a big voice in the Democratic Party. So if we're talking about the digital assets markets in general, a Republican victory, much more beneficial. A Democratic victory could weigh on them. And we can see it with the odds being changed from a clear cut, from poly markets, etc., from a Trump victory to narrowing down. You're seeing crypto moving lower as well, in expectation that Trump might not actually win.
Very specific question. If Trump gets elected clearly in a red sweep, could we see Bitcoin reaching new record highs?
Yes. I think the possibility of a potential strategic reserve of Bitcoin that was being touted, new record highs, it's going to be quite a rise. There is also something in particular about crypto that I would like to touch upon, which is the Senate race between Elizabeth Warren and Johnny Deaton, the Republican contender. So this particular race, personally, it's very interesting because we have Elizabeth Warren, a well-known Democrat, and the contender is a pro-XRP lawyer. So for the crypto markets, and in particular XRP, despite the Republican challenger trailing by about 20 points, which makes it very unlikely for him to win, in the event that an upset similar to that of Trump in 2016 is made, and we see a pro-XRP lawyer which represented XRP holders in the famous SEC versus Ripple case, which saw a partial victory for Ripple, then we could see XRP potentially skyrocketing to all-time highs, although we do need to say that it is a far-fetched scenario based on the recent polls.
Okay.
Doesn't really seem likely, but for crypto enthusiasts, that is also a race that might be worth watching tonight.
Okay, so we're covered.
We're covered.
Thank you very much for watching, but before we close out, one small word of warning here. Be on your guards about any possible sudden moves today, high volatility, which is a big issue. And we'll see you again on Thursday, where we will have a look at the results of the US elections, so how it's happening, and at the same time also discuss the Fed's interest rate decision. Once again, thank you.